Hey everyone, Professor Carafit in the Bio Bunker. Last time we talked a bit about the endocrine system. Let's review that slightly. Um, so we talked a little bit about how there are different ways signals can be sent. We talked a bit about a few of the organs that do it. So we have adrenal glands and thyroid glands and all the different glands, testes and ovaries and all of those things which secrete chemical signals. And those signals come in a variety of flavors, if you will, different properties. And the receptors for those different signals will be in different places depending on the properties of the signal. They might be in the cell surface or they might be inside the cell. So steroid hormones, for example, must cross into a cell to be received. Here we have an example of a simple endocrine pathway. Simple because what we have here is known as a non-tropic hormone, meaning it's a simple excretion from a cell, goes through the body, targets a cell, leads to a response. So the signal leads to a response, in this case, the secretion of bicarbonate. We mentioned this in the last lecture, but that's a simple pathway known as a tropic hormone, meaning or I'm sorry, a non-tropic hormone, meaning the signal causes a response essentially. It leads to a transduction pathway inside of that cell leading to the response. Now, one of the major glands in this system is known as the pituitary gland. It's actually two glands kind of fused into one, attached to the brain. It's got the posterior and anterior pituitary, as we see here. You can see here up at the top, they're located on the brain there, with the anterior being forward and the posterior being behind. Pretty straightforward there. And it also can have what we would call a non-tropic effect. So here we have an example of a stimulus. In this case, this is one of those rare cases of positive feedback. So we have a stimulus. In this case, the stimulus is milk release caused by the suckling of an infant on the breast. And that's the stimulus, and that causes a secretion of a neurosecretory cell. So this is one of those examples of the neuroendocrine system. So there are nerves leading from the breast to the brain, essentially, and the suckling causes an impulse to fire, which leads eventually to a hormone to be released, which stimulates the posterior pituitary, releases oxytocin here into the blood, which causes more milk to be released. It's a positive feedback, one of those few cases of positive feedback. So the hormone docks to the target cells, causes more milk to be released. So the baby gets a little bit of milk by suckling, and then that causes milk to be produced in more rapid succession, allowing the baby to get lots of milk. So really interesting system there, caused by as you see once again, the anterior pituitary, or that's right, the posterior pituitary gland. Now that gland has lots of functionality, including in stress response. I know we're all familiar with the stress response. So let's look at A here, stress response in the adrenal medulla. So here we have an example of stress in the brain causing a neuron to fire, so nervous system firing down the spinal cord, that leading to the adrenal medulla, so the inside of this adrenal gland here. So we probably have we probably have a endocrine effect here going on, but that leads to the adrenal medulla to secrete compounds. And if you look in your book, I'm going to hold it up here. This figure is in the book, right where my thumb is there. Figure 4519, and it shows you the effects of what's being released. So what's being released here? Epinephrine and neuroepinephrine. And what is that going to do? It's going to cause glycogen to break down to glucose. It's going to also, because you're breaking down glycogen, that's stored glucose, you're going to increase blood glucose levels. So you're increasing blood glucose levels, you're increasing blood pressure, increasing breathing rate and metabolic rate, and changing blood flow patterns. So what have we done here? We have basically released adrenaline, epinephrine, and that's going to cause a fight or flight response where, oh crap, I'm going to have to run from this bear. You have tons of blood sugar now because your cells need to burn all kinds of energy to run. You have blood flow directed away from your digestive system towards like organs so you can run faster and things like that. You're changing your metabolic rate, your blood pressure is increased to help you get away or fight. Meanwhile, the anterior pituitary, it's releasing chemicals as well that circulate through the body that are going to affect the adrenal cortex. And so you can see that in the same figure in your book. There are different things being released here. Some of them increase your blood volume and blood pressure as well. Also, we're breaking down fats into energy now. We're increasing blood glucose in that way. We're suppressing the immune system for a moment to kind of save energy, essentially, and get on with our lives. So stress can have a number of effects on the body. And what we see here is what we might think of as a tropic hormone, meaning a hormone's released by the body. So in this case, a tropic hormone is a hormone released by the body, like this one here released by the pituitary, ACTH, which causes the release of other hormones. So tropic, it's like a cascade of hormones. One hormone releases another, causes another hormone to be released. Or maybe it causes several hormones to be released. So that's what they mean by tropic hormones. One leads to more being released. In both cases here, though, the body is now ready to go. Now, the problem is if you're constantly stressed, like in a situation where you have family issues or breaking up with a loved one, right, or constantly hungry and starving, you're going to have these hormones released a lot over and over and over and over and over and over again, which can lead to chronic health problems. So that's why it's important to try to manage stress. So epinephrine is released. I already mentioned a few of these. I read them at you from the book here, but epinephrine, adrenaline, has a number of effects, and I want to point that out. So not only does it have just like one effect on one cell, it can affect lots of cells in lots of ways, causing more things to occur. So in liver cells, it is going to change glycogen metabolism. It's going to cause smooth muscle cells to have vasodilation, causing increased blood supply, so the blood vessels are going to dilate. And it's also going to cause smooth muscles of the intestines to constrict, reducing blood flow to the intestines, so you have more blood flowing to your muscles and brain and things so you can run and get away. So it has lots of effects on the body. Many, many, many effects rather than just one. So here we can see examples of this. So we can see liver cell. Here's epinephrine docking to a liver cell, causing increased blood glucose levels. We're secreting glucose. If it docks to a smooth muscle cell in this case, that cell relaxes, allowing blood flow to increase. But in other places, it's going to cause smooth muscle to contract, which then stops blood flow to your digestive system and redirects it elsewhere. So one signal can have many effects throughout the body. And why? How could it possibly do that? In two basic ways. You can have different receptors, like we see up here. Notice between B and C, we have different receptors, which can lead to different responses. Or you can have the same receptor, but have different transduction pathways take place inside that cell, leading to different responses. So we can have the same receptors, like look down here, same receptors, but different intracellular proteins, so different transduction pathways. That's the chain of events that happens in the cell. Or you have different receptors causing different things to happen. So here's an example of transduction pathways. So remember, signal transduction can amplify, like we see over here, reception of the signal. So what would happen? Let's look at the one on the left. Signal is received right here. Then that signal, that molecule, that hormone does not come into the cell, but it causes a change to this molecule. It probably adds a phosphate group to it from ATP, which then turns on this molecule, which then activates the response. Another thing that can happen is one molecule could activate several molecules, and so that could be a case where we have several responses taking place in one cell, perhaps. And so you turn on lots of things. And so what we have here, then we could call that a hormonal cascade, right? Where one thing turns on, another thing turns on, another thing, lots of things. And that's kind of what they mean when we talk about tropic hormones. One hormone causes lots of things to happen, lots of things throughout the body, whereas a non-tropic hormone is a real simple signal, hey, you do this, and that takes place. So we can see here a signal could be received and then lots of things activated, lots of these kinases activated. Kinases are molecules that grab phosphate groups from ATP, stick them to another protein, and that changes the protein shape and turns it on. So one signal could activate a whole bunch of molecules, leading to a whole bunch of cell response. That's the transduction pathway. So these secretions can lead to lots of things going on. I just thought I'd point out that one of the things that you might be releasing here in B over on this side is really similar to the cortisone cream that you might rub on your skin, like if you have an itch, because it can cause blood vessels to contract, which reduces blood flow to an itchy area, causing a rash to go away. So we use some of these things, these hormones, as drugs as well. Kind of cool. I also want to point out that plants can make hormones, and they can do cell-to-cell communication, or they put their hormones in their phloem rather than blood, of course, to send them throughout the body. And same thing, reception, transduction, and response, just like in an animal. One example done by a guy you might have heard of, an experiment done by Charles Darwin, did a very basic experiment where he cut the tip off the end of a plant, chopped it off, right? And he stuck a cap on top of a plant as well. So he has lots of experiments going on here. In one, he cuts the tip of the plant off. In another one, he sticks like a hat on the plant so the tip of the plant can't receive light. In another case, he puts a clear cap on the plant, a good control. And in another case, he puts a collar way down here on the plant. And he puts light off to the side, like we see right here. What happens in the plant with the tip removed? It grows straight, or it just sits there, one or the other. In the one with a hat on, an opaque cap, it grows straight. It doesn't bend towards the light. But in the other two examples, it bends towards the light. So he's like, oh, something in the tip of that plant is making the plant bend towards light. He figured that out with this experiment. So you can figure out the controls. If you put a cap on it, it doesn't bend towards the light. If you put a cap further down on the plant, it still bends towards light. So something in the tip is being generated. Then later, another set of scientists here, they take a tip of one plant and they cut it off and they stick it onto a piece of agar, which is like jello. And then they stick it back onto the plant as it's bending towards the light. And then they remove that little piece of jello and they put it on another plant and it will bend in a certain direction. So something's being secreted into that jello. And actually what they did in this experiment, I should point out, the first thing they did is they stuck a piece of jello-like substance on this plant between the tip and the plant, and it still bent towards the light. And they took a piece of mica, which is like rock basically, and they stuck it between the tip and the plant, and it wouldn't bend towards the light. So what that told them is something is being secreted from the tip and going into the plant, causing it to bend towards the light. Later on, they could take that same piece of gel out, that piece of gelatin, and put it on another plant, and it would bend towards the light too. So they knew there was something in that gelatin that had been secreted. And so what happens is the way plants bend towards light is the shaded side, as we see here, has cells that grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and the cells on the other side of the plant don't grow bigger, and that causes the plant to bend. So something being secreted by the tip of the plant is causing the plant to bend. And what we now know is it's a molecule called auxin. When a plant receives light on the tip of a branch, it produces auxin, and the auxin concentrates on the sides away from the light, causing that side to actually grow more and more. That hormone causes growth, and it causes that side to grow, and it causes that tip to bend towards the light. So auxin is a growth hormone in plants. So plant hormones have many, many functions, auxin being one of them. They can cause stems to grow and roots to grow. They cause apical dominance, which means it makes one branch like the king branch. That's how you get a tree. One branch becomes more dominant than the rest, and it becomes the trunk. It can cause fruit to ripen. So that's why if you lay a ripe banana next to unripe bananas, they'll ripen faster because it's releasing hormones into the air, a gaseous hormone that will cause fruit to develop. You can release hormones into the air that will cause leaves of trees to fall off or abscise. Hormones released by roots cause mycorrhizal fungi to move in. So plants use hormones for tons of things that you probably never even thought about. Here's an example of fruit ripening. As a fruit ripens, it releases more and more and more of a hormone that's actually a gas called ethylene. And ethylene is the gas, so that way, well, what that means is if you lay a fruit that's ripe next to a fruit that's not ripe, that unripe fruit will ripen fast in the presence of that ripened fruit because it's releasing ethylene. Also, a cool experiment, if you take a jar and you seal a plant in it with a fruit, let me rephrase that. If you take a jar and you put, in this case, a sprig of holly, which is a plant you can find growing in lots of people's yards, and then you put an apple in there, and that's a ripe apple. That apple's releasing ethylene. In a closed environment, that ethylene causes the leaves to fall off, just like in fall when leaves fall off. And so the leaves will fall off of the sprig of holly. And here's the control jar here, and then the experimental jar here. That's something you could do at home. Just put a little bit of Vaseline at the base of the glass so it's sealed tightly. And that's just because of a hormone being produced by the plant that causes ripening. But in this case, it can leak out and affect other fruits or other plants nearby. So plants, just like you, produce hormones that work the same basic way your hormones do. Reception, transduction, and then a response. All right. So the next video will be about the nervous system, and we'll start talking about this little guy. I want you to look him up. It's called the blue ring octopus. Do a little research on the blue ring octopus, and I'll see you in the next lecture.